This is Rough Drafts Welcome,
the podcast where you can mess up, and we can too.
I'm Sachiko.
And I'm Erin.
And together with the editors at Salt and Sage Books,
we're changing the face of storytelling, one rough draft at a time.
We're glad you're here. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Rough Drafts Welcome. It is February, and I'm excited to spend this month chatting with you about romance. We're going to talk about the romance genre more generally in a couple of these following episodes, but today I wanted to talk about my own experience with the romance genre and a particular trope that has been on my mind because of a research project that I did. So we'll just dive right in. We're going to be talking about dark romance today and its popularity, what I think makes it so popular, and some of the problematic things to be aware of around dark romance, and maybe why it, what is it exactly that makes people love it so much. So a couple of disclaimers before we begin. I am a late arrival to the romance genre. For a long time, beginning in my teenage years for sure, I felt pretty scornful of romance as a genre more generally. It took me a long time to really understand why romance was so enjoyable. And to be clear, I felt this way about all things romance. It wasn't just writing that, to me, it wasn't just the genre romance writing. It was also I hate this phrase, but chick flicks and rom-coms and anything with a romantic subplot left me feeling deeply uncomfortable and dissatisfied. We could probably spend an entire episode talking about why that is, but for me, it really boiled down to a lot of patriarchal programming and a lot of, I'm going to call it Christian panic, that I was given so neatly gift wrapped in a bow by the culture that I grew up in, as well as my family. So with all of that said, I'm a late arrival to romance. It took me until I was in my late 20s to really start to even read romance as a genre. And I still really enjoy romance to this day. So with that in mind, I feel like it's important for me to acknowledge that I am coming into this discussion as someone who has only been reading the genre for a fairly short amount of time, especially compared to some of you avid readers out there. And I think that that gives me the downside of I don't know the patterns as well as if I had been reading this genre the whole time. We could talk a lot about fantasy and the patterns that happen in fantasy because that was my go-to genre for several years. But I do think it also gives me an interesting outsider's perspective because I also haven't been in it that long. So the things that I am going to talk about today are primarily focused on romances that are straight. They are primarily focused on main characters who are white women, who are cisgender, and who are straight. I think it would be disingenuous to not acknowledge that that is a pretty large majority of the romance canon is white, cis women at the forefront of the romantic relationship. There has definitely also been an increase of more diverse characters, and I have really, really, really enjoyed reading those particular stories because they're so different. I feel like they give such a different approach to the whole idea of romance and really help to interrogate some of the things that we're going to talk about in the rest of the episode, but also I like to look at them through a lens of what does this author see that I don't, because I'm so used to a worldview that is drenched in white supremacy. So I'm not the right person to talk about necessarily how authors of color are completely revolutionizing the genre, but I do want to talk about some of the things that I do see as a reader who is trying hard to read more diversely and with more awareness. And I also want to talk about things that I see genre-wide in more of a marketing sense. And yes, okay, I've been telling you what I'm going to tell you for a while now. So how about we'll just get into it. So this all started because I got a request through Salt and Sage Books from an author who was beginning to write in a new genre. This particular author, I am going to refer to them as them because I went back and looked and I could not find anything where they indicated their pronouns, and I would not like to misname them. So, all right. So this author asked that I help them figure out how to write a mafia romance. And at that point, I was still in the very beginning stages of my own entering into romance as a territory. So here's what I did. But I'm really, really, really good at researching and at understanding genres and audiences and how you can market and where to place like the particular tropes, and how I'm very good at identifying all of that. So what I did, essentially, in a nutshell, it was a little bit more in depth than this, but basically I went to the Amazon Kindle main page, which is this author wanted to put their book into Kindle Unlimited. So we went and looked at the mafia romance subgenres, right? All of the categories on Amazon. And I looked through all of them, and I wrote up little mini like explanations of every single one of the top 20 mafia romance books over, I think it was like 3 separate subgenres. So we had like 60 books to pull from. Is that right? 20, 40, 60. Yes. So I had these 60 books that were all selling really, really well. I looked at their covers to see what patterns I could find within the covers, what was selling well with a cover. Then I looked through all of their blurbs, found a couple of keywords that were sticking out, and noted the different plot elements that I saw standing out in each one. That was all very interesting and was really good information for how to position the book in the market. But what I found to be the most revealing was when I went into the comments. So I read the top 10 helpful comments and the top 10 5-star reviews, and then also the top 10 1-star reviews, so that we can get a balanced look. And then if those weren't really giving me where it was, I went to the 3-star reviews, because those are the people who like the genre, they liked the book, but they didn't love it. So I went and read through a bunch of those as well, especially if the 5 stars and 1 stars were really polarizing and I couldn't get a sense of like what the book was. So after doing that and reading a ridiculous amount of reviews, I learned a couple of things about mafia romance, and it sent me on then my own particular journey of figuring out dark romances. So I've talked about my own personal history on this podcast before, but in case you are new, if this is the first episode that you're listening to, I was raised in a very conservative, very Christian, very Republican home, where like if you showed a teeny tiny shadow, not even cleavage, okay, like a shadow on your shirt, like if your shirt didn't then I got in trouble. So with all of that in mind, I was a little shocked by some of the things that I found in these dark romances. And the mafia genre is a particular one, but we're not just talking mafia here about the genres, because, then when I went back in and I started reading other dark romances and really trying to get my head around the genre as a whole, it took me a minute to kind of stop clutching my pearls. I don't feel ashamed to admit that, because it really was a shocking experience for me to read these books where the hero is often a very, not even morally gray, like morally not a very good person. So it took me a while, like I felt very confused, honestly. I was like, why is it that like this, Why is this so popular? But then also in me, why is it so like juicy, tasty, num num num? Why do I want to read more? Even though part of me is like, oh, how dare, why is it that I feel drawn to keep reading in this? And I think it extends also to monster romances. So what exactly is dark and dangerous? What I found is that a morally dark hero, so we're going to call them the villain, right? We'll call him a villain. He's a villain who the author wants you to fall in love with. So this villain, what I found, has a couple of rules. The first rule is that he is terrifying, right? He has to be scary. And he is often scary in more than one way. So he might be very physically tall, right? So he is intimidating because he is a big man. He might not be super tall, but maybe he is like a square in his muscles. Or maybe he is both. He is often both. He is often very tall and very muscular. He almost always has some sort of wealth attached to him, some sort of status symbol. I found this particularly interesting because it made me wonder about the interplay between someone who is abusive, and we're gonna talk about the potential ramifications of abuse in this, but of not glorifying the abuse, of romanticizing abuse. We'll get to that. But it made me wonder about how much does someone's financial status as a culture, how much does someone's financial status kind of let us be like, oh yeah, sure, that's fine, whatever. Like he can do that because he's rich. Oh yeah, he can do that because he wears a nice suit. He can do that because he wears some fancy watch. So he often has a lot of external status things. He's either wealthy, or he dresses really nice, or he has a really nice car. He often has bodyguards. He is often very important within the dark world that we are in. Now, this makes sense to me because romance at its core, and I think all fiction, honestly, at its core, is about people who are the main character, right? Why would we read it otherwise? But it is unusual to find stories that center people who are not at the center of the story. Those are quite rare. In fact, I think I have only read 2 in my whole reading career where it has been about the sidekick, and then it was specifically marketed as like sidekick to the hero or something along those lines. They just don't happen very often. So this person will often be like mafia boss's son, or mafia boss's brother who is in line to inherit everything, or mafia boss himself, right? So we have him, he has some position of power. He has some sort of external trappings of wealth and privilege, and he is often scary in more than one way. So all of these things put together, we need to talk more about the scary in one way. He needs to have really questionable morals. And this was the part where I was getting really stuck in my own head as a reader and in trying to understand the genre. Because I'm over here like, he's handsome. Cool. He has nice muscles. Cool. He has a lot of money. Also cool. Why do we like him though? Because he, like in chapter 1, does like all of these despicable, horrible things. That was another part of my research, is any book that had the first chapter available as a preview, I read through the first chapter and made notes about what was like the patterns that I saw and what was effective and who is presented first and things like that. And it was often from the point of view of the man first in the romance, which was very interesting to me because a lot of other romances actually center the women. And this is where I need to pause and say that if you are using this episode for like market research, maybe double check, because this has been over a year ago that I did all this research, and indie markets change really quickly. So, but I did find it very interesting that we started with the man's perspective. That is not, in my personal experience, again, isn't super common. So I found it very interesting that we were starting with the man from the very beginning. And the thing that I found that was so interesting is that it did not matter which book it was that I read. So over these 60 books, as I was really digging deep into the genre to understand it, the man always did something horrible. Like any one of us would look at it and be like, whoa, that's woo. And it's very rarely in defense of someone else. Like he's not doing it. It's not like a touch her and see where your hand ends up. It's not that. It's not protective. It's just outright morally kind of frightening. So he always does something like that. And so we are left with this sense of like, this is a dangerous person. And so in reading this, I'm over here feeling my heart rate speed up and being like, I know what book I picked up. I know this is a romance. I know they are eventually going to get together with whoever this girl is that I'm going to meet in the next chapter. Whoever the woman is in the next chapter. I am trying so hard to stop referring to adult women as girls. It drives me, makes me feel like I am perpetuating the infantilization of women. I don't like it. So the woman who we are going to meet in the next chapter. But so I leave that first chapter feeling like, ooh, I don't know, like, how are we going to save this? But then what you learn fairly quickly, first of all, for the readers who like that genre, they are going to read that first one and be like, ooh, I am ready, because he is going to show his soft side at some point. And that was the part that really surprised me. And I think that this is why we like this sort of story so much. So stick with me, because we're going to pull back a little bit into a broader feminist lens. And again, this is my own perspective. I know I'm a white lady. I have tried to unpack a lot of my own privilege and the white supremacy that I live in. I am going to continue unpacking that probably until the day I die. And I know there are nuances that I'm missing here. That said, what I feel like is happening here is that as a white woman, men are scary. And I can already hear some people in the back, not all men. Sure. But my general experience with men over the course of my life has been a frightening one. It has been one where you can hear my voice change when I say that. Men are scary. Men have more power. Men have more privilege. Often men have more physical strength. Men have the ability to make or break your career, or to, and again, in my experience, I don't think I ever worked a job where I had a boss or a manager who was a woman. They were always men. And so there was always a power imbalance there, where I felt very aware of the fact that I was under him when it came to power. Of course, there are men who have subverted that and who have, I'm married to a man now, and he is a really lovely human. But the power structure is there, and it is so embedded into the patriarchal world that we live in that it is difficult to avoid. So, as I'm reading this book and I see this man who is scary, I'm having I can feel, even as I'm talking about, I can feel my nervous system responding around it. I feel afraid. I'm reading about this man and I am seeing he's scary, and I feel a little afraid of him, and I would not want to be on his bad side. And that is the key right there, is that as you're reading through this and you're seeing his anger and you're seeing his, willingness to hurt people. And I'm trying not to give specifics because I don't want to throw any particular book or trope underneath the bus, because I think they all have their place. Excuse me. But the general vibe of the first chapter, though, is to say, look at how frightening this man is. And then, as the reader, that eventually he is going to be on your side as a woman. This is my experience reading it. So I'm reading it and I'm thinking, I know we're going to meet the girl, or the woman, dang it, in the next chapter. And she is going to need his particular ferocity and danger and scariness and his willingness to do bad things. And bad, bad things. So the whole time that I'm reading this first chapter, though, of seeing how frightening this man is, I am remembering that eventually this man is going to be on my side. And I'm saying my because that is how I read the books. They feel, not that they're self-insert necessarily, but I readily identify a lot easier with the woman in the story more than I do the man because of my own identity. So I'm reading this and feeling like this man, who is terrifying, is eventually going to be so in love with the woman that he will use all of these terrifying forces on her behalf. And it's interesting because you often read in romances this trope that, oh, the woman can change him. She's going to make him better. She's going to make him, turn to a life of good or whatever. But that doesn't happen in dark romance. In dark romance, the man is scary and he stays scary for everyone except her. So is she changing him? A little. But she is changing him only with her. So then what ends up happening throughout the rest of the book that I observed from looking at these 60 books, and again, it was a while ago, but what I observed was that dark romances are often about a very scary man who is often the embodiment of a patriarchal man. He is strong, he is handsome, he is tall, he is wealthy, he is scary. Again, to me, he feels scary. He's powerful, he's handsome, he's tall, he's strong, he's wealthy. He is going to become soft for just this one person, for just this one woman. So we have the second chapter, and then usually what happens, then they meet, and then third chapter is again from his point of view. And often what happens between chapters 2 and 3, sometimes into chapter 4, is that there is a particular moment when we identify this scary patriarchal man as having a sensitive side. And it looked like this when I looked at all of the research that I did. The scary patriarchal man, who is this mob boss or this mafia leader or whatever it happens to be, has a soft spot. And it is not for the woman, okay? It is for something else. He always has one rule he will not break. So in some of them, it is that he does not ever involve children. Like if a child is in the room, it doesn't matter if he's been setting up this assassination for 7 years. He will not go through with it if a child is in the room. Or he might have a soft spot for animals. So in one of them, this is more than one. One of his team members will kick a dog out of the way, or will talk about drowning kittens or something genuine, we can all probably look at that and be like, no, not great. But he will have some moment where someone else does something towards an animal and he will absolutely lose his cool. Or he will give a punishment to the person who did that awful thing or whatever it happens to be. But he always has some rule, or that he is very, very opposed to, assault in any form. But he has rules. So it's not, when I very first started looking at it, I was like, these men are completely amoral. They have no morals. They don't have any code that they seem to live by. It just seems to be whatever I say goes. But the more that I looked into it, the more I realized that no, there are rules. There are rules. They are just very different from what we would socially consider like as a community, what we would consider appropriate behavior. But there are rules. There's always one particular soft spot. And he shows that soft spot to the woman. Then that is what happens, because she sees this big, scary, scary man. But she meets him in such a way that she sees the little soft nugget underneath. She sees that, oh, he saw a cat on the side of the road. And like he stopped and he got out in his Armani suit and his very tall and his handsome hair and his piercing eyes and his slightly stubbled jawline made of chiseled granite or whatever. She sees all of that, but then she sees him pick up a cat, like who is mangy and gross and biting and hissing, and the cat bites him. And she sees him be very gentle with the cat because he will not leave a cat behind. And then that is the moment, right? Because we've already seen that he's scary. We already know that he is a scary person who does scary things. But then we see this moment of tenderness in him. And I feel like it is a patriarchal thing because it leans really heavily on this idea that men can only be emotionally vulnerable and connected with women who they are romantically involved with. I said with twice. But so, then the whole thing happens and they eventually get together. But the tenderness that she observed in him then eventually transfers to her. And then there is a protective, very scary, very strong, very wealthy, very powerful, very privileged man who has her back. And she is now protected. So to me, it feels pretty clear why that is such a rewarding genre to read. Because as someone who has grown up feeling very afraid of men, I often felt like that it was up to the men in my life to protect me from other men. And we see this all over, the whole idea that if you're being hit on and you want somebody to leave you alone, what you need to say is, I have a boyfriend, or I'm married, or my husband wouldn't appreciate this, or, oh, that's my brother just over there, or did you know that my dad is a mob boss? I don't know, but you all know what I mean. This idea that if we can have a scary man at our back, that will protect us from other scary men. So I get it. Oh, I get it. This feeling that I can be protected. But it's also simultaneously this sense of I can be protected from the thing I'm afraid of by being romantically involved with the thing that I am afraid of. So it feels very much to me like, I get it. First of all, I'm not trying to dog on this genre at all. I think that it is an important genre, and I think that it provides a lot of comfort, especially for people who have been in positions where they have not been protected, especially by the men in their lives. I can see how reading this would give your brain and your nervous system a chance to look at things a little differently and to explore it in a way that feels safer. So I'm not at all trying to say that it's a bad genre. I do think that it reflects us as a society, though, having this sense of kind of being okay with the fact that men are socialized to be really violent, and really feeding into the perpetuated idea of masculinity as looking one particular way. It is tall. It is handsome. It is muscular. It is cruel. It doesn't have emotions. This version of masculinity, the only feeling that you ever see him display is anger, at least for like the first half of the book. And he's very quick to be angry. And the only way to stay safe from that as a woman is to snuggle up next to it and hope it won't bite you. I mean, I feel like it is. Isn't that what so many women do all day, every day in real life? They might not be mob bosses, but they are still people who are in our lives, who have the ability and the potential to do scary things. And this part for me feels like the most important. Who is going to stop them? Especially if they're doing things that aren't illegal. I mean, I'm sure you've all heard stories about women who would like to leave their marriages, but they are unable to do so because of financial abuse or because of like their names aren't on their house deed because their husband removed them, or that they are left cut off completely from any sort of resource, especially if, well, maybe not especially, but I've personally seen it a lot happen with women who have been stay-at-home moms, especially those who did not finish their education for whatever reason. And that's very common in the culture that I grew up in, for a woman to leave college halfway through and to be married. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but that that particular set of circumstances leaves a lot of space for abuse to happen. I've been kind of alarmed to talk with some of my friends, and some of my spouse's friends actually, and the way that the wives are treated and the way that the daughters are treated. So it feels important to me on more than just a level of I'm writing fiction and I want it to be engaging. To me, this market is really looking into what happens when we exist in a world that is incredibly patriarchal. And that world is set on hurting us as women. And again, I know I'm speaking primarily to cis straight women here, and I know that there are a lot of nuances here that I am missing for the trans and the non-binary communities and the communities of color. I'm aware that I'm missing all of that nuance, but I feel so sad, honestly, when I read these books. And again, I am not trying to say that they're not great books. Some of my very, very, very favorite authors are ones who write these really dark romances, and they're so engaging and you just can't put them down. They're so good. But it makes me reflect as a whole on this sense that the patriarchal society that we live in is, it's almost like it just takes it to the logical extreme, that men have to be this strong, macho, scary man in order to really be a man and in order to really protect their women. I'm putting those in quotes because I think that those ideas are problematic. But so I think for me, the dark and dangerous romances, the dark romances specifically, they are really engaging because they're well written. They have naturally really high stakes. And they are as well a real reflection of the way that we as a society, and specifically we as cis women, move through a space in patriarchal culture and in a patriarchal world, how we can exist and how we can exist safely when we are in this scary world of men, if you will. So obviously this has implications for romanticizing domestic violence and for romanticizing partner abuse and for romanticizing all of those things. And maybe we can talk about that more in another episode. But I find it really interesting to think about these romance novels as women exploring ways to survive in a culture that sees them as commodities. And again, I don't dislike the genre. I quite enjoy the genre, actually. But sometimes I feel really sad after I've read one of those books, because I can see so clearly how women are being told, not in the book, but just on a cultural, broader lens level, how much we are told that the way to exist is to find a scary man who wants to sleep with you and therefore be safe. And then to be protected by him. And the only way to get that is to be beautiful, or to be alluring, or to, I don't know, have a particular perfume that stays in his nose for weeks afterward and you just distract him. But it all comes down to this attraction level. And I do enjoy these books. I really, genuinely, I really, really do. But what I want to say to everyone who reads these books and might feel that same way that I do, that same sense of like just fear and sadness about existing in a world that is patriarchal as a woman. What I want to say is that you are worth more than your looks. And whether or not a man wants to be with you or is attracted to you or any of those things does not and should not determine whether or not you deserve to be safe. You deserve to be safe, period, because you are a human, because you exist, because you are alive. You deserve safety. And that includes in romantic relationships, and that also includes you outside of romantic relationships. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to say than that. Again, I have no issue with the dark and dangerous romantic leads. I think they're a lot of fun. There are some of them that are so well written that, like, book boyfriend, sign me up. But I also think it's important to look at it through a broader lens and to think about what it is telling us as primarily women who are reading these romance genres, that how we interact with patriarchy and how we interact with a patriarchal society is really dependent on our looks, and that we are very dependent on men to protect us from other men. I don't love any of that. Okay, well, on that downer note, I hope you have a lovely February and that you are enjoying the weather wherever you are. At my house, it is very cold. And that's really it. You can tune in next time. We're going to talk a little bit more about romance tropes throughout the month of February. We're also going to have Amy come back, and she's going to talk with us about healthy relationships in fiction and maybe some red flags that she sees more generally in romance books, and just, the interplay of all of that. I'm excited for that conversation. Okay, thank you so much for listening today, and I will see you next time.
This has been Rough Drafts Welcome.
Thank you so much for listening.
Got any questions? We would love to hear them. Got a complaint? We'll hear it too.
Yep. Leave us a 5-star review, pretty please, and thank you. And if you want to book with Salt and Sage Books or learn anything else about what we do, or if you want to work with us or take our courses or blah, 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 you can find us at www.saltandsagebooks.com, and we're all over social media too.
We sure are.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.